As a responsible person with growing concerns for your privacy and personal liberty, you want to know where we're headed and what you can do about it. We ask the experts what you need to do to take prudent and responsible action to safeguard your family's wealth and well-being, and what basic first steps will help you to be aware and prepared. ReluctantPreppers.com.
Welcome back, Reluctant Preppers. Today we have a returning guest, Jerry Robinson, founder of Follow the Money. He is a Christian economist, a commentator on financial markets. He's written the book, Bankruptcy of Our Nation. He's here back with us on Reluctant Preppers to talk about some provocative topics today. One is whether Christians should arm themselves or not, the topic of the ethics of guns and of self-defense and of preparedness to defend others. Then we'd like to talk about the ethics of preparedness itself and what our obligations are to ourselves, our families, and perhaps to others, to be able to assist them in times of crisis. And we'll see where other conversation takes us. But Jerry, we're delighted to have you back here on Reluctant Preppers.
Great to be here. Thank you.
So Jerry, first on the topic of arming yourself as a prepper and the ethics around that, I understand you've done some research recently into that topic, and understandably there's some confusion on the part of many people in our country, as well as many Christians specifically, who have adopted different understandings of whether people should or should not arm themselves. And as preppers, even reluctant preppers, that's a key consideration that comes up if you're trying to prepare for potential social unrest and also being able to keep your family safe and whatever source of vital food necessities and that sort of thing you may have. So if you could help us understand what you've looked into, what kind of sources you've considered, and what the moral and ethical implications are of arming yourself as a prepared person.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely, Don. Again, well, I say all this with this in mind, that I certainly have been someone who has armed myself. I in my own home, I plan on protecting my family. So this is not something that I'm going to say with great glee, because as I jumped into the Bible after this whole Charleston shooting by this act of domestic terrorism, there was a big call on a lot of the conservative outlets, Fox News among them, who tends to cater to Christians, and they were telling basically that the Christians that, hey, had these people in Charleston in the church, had they been packing heat, they could have killed the shooter, and then everything would have been better. And so now there seems to be a call for pastors to pack heat in church. Something about this just bothered me as I was listening. I found out that there really are only two scriptures that Christians point to defend their right to have a gun and to use it in self-defense. Now, the first verse comes in Exodus chapter 22. This is actually part of the Mosaic Law. And what it says in Exodus 22 is that if a thief is caught while breaking in and is struck so that he dies, there will be no blood guiltiness on his account. But if the sun has risen on him, there will be blood guiltiness on his account. So in essence, what this scripture is saying is that if somebody is, back in these days, it was kind of commonplace to keep your animals close in the courtyard, close into your home. People would break in and want to steal your animals typically, or maybe you had some jewels or some valuable possessions. Regardless, this verse is talking to the thief. If the thief is caught while breaking in and he is struck so that he dies, back then it could have been a stick. Today it could be a AK-47, whatever it might be. If the thief is struck so that he dies, there will be no blood guiltiness on his account if it's nighttime. But if the sun has risen on him, then we are not to use, any kind of force. So this verse right here seems to set the precedent that it is okay. If a thief breaks in and wants to steal your TV and it's nighttime and you don't know who he is and you wake up and you shoot him and it's nighttime, apparently, according to the Mosaic Law, that's fine. And so I read that and I thought, okay, well, of course, that's the Old Testament. What does the New Testament say? Because, of course, if we just keep the Old Testament, we also have to go along with other verses in that chapter that talk about how we're not to allow a sorceress to live, right? or we are to put all kidnappers to death, regardless of whether they kill their victim or not. We're also to stone those who don't worship on the Sabbath and instead choose to work. We need to be okay with men taking multiple wives, Exodus 21:10. We need to be okay with killing children if they strike his father or mother, or if they curse his father or mother. So, in other words, we can't just pick and choose in the Old Testament and say, I like this law, so I'm going to do it, but I'm not going to keep this law. That's not how it works. So that's what we see in the Old Testament. That's the only verse that really speaks to this issue for Christians. So when you go to the New Testament, you get into the New Testament, of course, you see Jesus really go right back to this same passage of Exodus 21:22. And he says in his Sermon on the Mount, you have heard it was said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I say to you, do not resist an evil person, but whoever slaps you on your right cheek, turn the other also. So he goes back and literally pulls the Mosaic law, the specific law that is undergirding many of these laws back then, eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. Somebody breaks in and into your house, kill him. Well, he's saying, that's what you heard it said. But now I'm telling you, do not do that. Do not resist an evil person. Now, many people will play that down in Matthew chapter 5 and say, well, he's not talking about the guy who breaks in and wants to kill your wife. He's not talking about the guy who breaks in and wants to rape your daughter. He's talking about the evil person who's just, giving you a hard time. I've heard people say that. Well, again, you really don't get to make stuff up as you go. I mean, that's kind of how Christianity's got to the place that it is that people keep making stuff up. And it continues to give Christians a black eye because you have, 70,000 different denominations now because everybody has their own strong opinion about what the Bible says. Well, the other verse, the other passage, I guess, that we should take into consideration is Luke 22. So you have Exodus 22 in the Old Testament that talks about kill the thief if he breaks in and it's okay, but don't do it during the day, only do it at nighttime. But in Luke 22, it seems as if Jesus tells his disciples to actually go out and buy a weapon. And so this has really been the verse that we've heard the most in churches and in from those who believe that we should pack heat as Christians and plan on killing anybody who wants to do us harm. And you go back to this verse in Luke 22, and here's what it says. Jesus is speaking to his disciples. He's just getting ready to go and pray at the Garden of Gethsemane. He's already done the Last Supper, and it's just that real pivotal time. And he speaks to his disciples, and he says in verse 35 of Luke 22, he says, and he said to them, when I sent you out without any money bag, no knapsack, no sandals, did you lack anything? And they said nothing. Of course, he's referring back to Matthew 10 whenever he sent his disciples out to preach the kingdom of God. And he said, don't take anything. Don't take a money bag. Don't take a staff. Don't take a knapsack, don't take sandals, just totally trust God. Well, he's asking them, did you trust me? I mean, did you lack anything? Can you trust me? And of course they say, no, we didn't lack anything. So verse 36, he says, but now let the one who has a money bag take it, and likewise a knapsack. So he's changing the rules here. And he says, and let the one who has no sword sell his cloak and buy one, period. So what I have heard a lot in the mainstream press, for those, and when I say mainstream, I'm talking about the Christian mainstream, is they point to this verse and say, see, Jesus said, if you don't have a sword, you need to sell the clothes on your back, even if you got to be naked, and buy a sword. See, Jesus wants you to carry a sword, period. Well, the problem is that, again, if you stop there, that's exactly what you read. I mean, that's exactly what it says. But if you go on just another verse and even just a few more, then you're going to see something very different. In verse 37, it says, he continues, for I tell you, obviously this is connected to what he just said. If you don't have a sword, go buy one. For I tell you that this scripture must be fulfilled in me, and he was numbered with the transgressors. So in essence, he's telling his disciples, hey, you need to bring some money, and you need to bring swords. Why? Because I'm supposed to be numbered with the transgressors. For what is written about me has its fulfillment. The next verse says, and they said, look, Lord, here are 2 swords. And he said, that's enough. So there's 12 guys, 11 disciples and Jesus, and 2 swords. I mean, he's certainly not telling everybody to pack an AK-47 based on that standard. I mean, he's basically saying 1 out of 6 should have a sword. 2 swords apparently is enough, because he wasn't planning on using the swords to fight for an earthly kingdom. He simply was saying that I have to be numbered with the transgressors. Later in that verse, and also in Matthew 26, whenever Peter actually draws a sword, remember, fishermen, people say, well, why did they have swords? Well, fishermen carried swords back then. It was very common. And Peter was a fisherman. So Peter pulls the sword out of his holster or whatever it was, and he strikes off the ear of the servant of the high priest. This is a capital offense. Here we go. Peter breaks the law. Peter is a transgressor. Jesus says, no more, put it up. And then in Matthew 26, he goes on and says, he who uses the sword and lives by the sword will die by the sword. So we have those are the only 2 scriptures that we have. And through very creative usage, people have taken these words and ignored everything else that Jesus has said about love your enemy, pray for those who persecute you, even forgiving the people who put him on the cross, and saying then to his disciples, follow me. Somehow you have this perversion that has emerged in 2015, and of course it's been going on for a long time, but now the debate is here even more, where we're all supposed to pack heat and kill those who try to hurt us. Makes sense, makes total sense if you're a red-blooded American. But if you are a Christ follower, you live to a higher standard. And so I guess the major theme here with this whole issue is, do Christians really want to be the people who go around killing those who are persecuting them? And as we go forward and we think about this, and we go back and we think about Jesus, let's go back and think about Jesus' disciples. I mean, you certainly didn't see Paul taking a sword across the continent of Europe and just, slashing his way through, killing anybody who disagreed with him or anybody. He was left for dead several times. People tried to murder him several times. And, Peter was, crucified. He certainly didn't try to fight off his captors. We don't see any kind of violence on the part of the disciples. So, yes, we have these 2 scriptures that if you really finesse them, you can pull out some sort of self-defense from them. But sadly, and I wish that it wasn't the case, because again, I do have, guns on my property and I do plan on protecting my wife. But now, as I've been doing this study, I've been coming to the realization that Christ calls us to a higher level. And that's hard for a prepper. That's really hard for somebody who is preparing, because you do see the writing on the wall. You see how dangerous these times are. And you have to choose your allegiance. Am I going to listen to what Jesus said and follow him and turn the other cheek? Or am I going to pack heat and kill anybody who wants to hurt me or my family? And it's not something that I can say that I have come to a great resolve on. It's something that I'm still grappling with. I think it's something that all, followers of Christ at least should entertain. If you've already made up your mind about it, but you haven't read any of the Bible about it, then that's foolish, right? There's probably people in the audience right now, Dunnigan, who are saying, well, I'm going to pack a gun. I don't care what that, or I know what the Bible's. Well, if they have never done the study, then you really can't call yourself a follower of Christ if you don't care what he says. If you don't care what he says, then just don't call yourself a follower. That's fine. But if you really want to follow Christ, you have to listen to what he says. And from what we have here in the passages that I've studied, it's quite contrary to what the American quote-unquote gospel has taught us about the virtue and value of packing heat. So anyway, that is all said to inform this debate about what's happening right now in the wake of the Charleston shooting. Should pastors pack heat? From what I've read, I don't think that they should. I think we need to be prepared for what's coming, but I don't think we need to be willing to kill people for it.
I know that message is it certainly got me thinking, and it's certainly going to have a lot of our audience thinking. I can imagine there's going to be a lively discussion thread that's going to follow after this, because people have a very natural and innate impulse and instinct to do whatever is necessary, depending on the situation, to protect themselves and their family, to directly, for self-defense. And there's certainly been many centuries of traditions of distinctions being made legally, both on the secular courts and in Christian law, about what is permissible or not permissible under certain circumstances for self-defense, that sort of thing. Has your study led you beyond the scriptures that you described so far into some of those additional traditions, or is that area of further study ahead?
Yeah, that will be further study ahead, but I do want to say also, I want to make sure that we stress this, that everything that I've said, the research that I've done, is strictly for the person who is a Christ follower. For any of your listeners who are not Christians, this is just something interesting for them to know about the Bible. It certainly does not apply to them at all. I mean, I'm not saying that no one should carry a gun. I'm talking about those who are, people who claim to be followers of Christ and are also preppers at the same time. We have an added responsibility to think about. We can't just go along with the masses. We have to think about what the Bible actually says about this. And we also, when you speak about those traditions, we have a lot of traditions not traditions necessarily. We have actual history in the New Testament, and we see nonviolence all throughout the New Testament. Peter, Paul, James, all laying down their life, never fighting back. And so, those guys are the people I try to mimic, not the founding fathers.
So, Jerry, on that topic of the ethics of self-defense, I also wanted to inject, in addition to scriptural references, that for Catholics, there is teachings of the Catholic Church on the distinctions that are made when a person does something in self-defense, that there is a action, the intention of the action is self-preservation, of preservation of our own life, and that we are justified and we have the right to preserve our own life, with the unintended consequence, which is not desired by the person doing it, of taking the other life. The purpose of the action isn't, I want to take this other person's life. No, I do not want to, but I do want to preserve mine, and that's an undesired consequence of that, in that kind of last case, worst case resort. So, and I'm not a moral theologian. I can't make defend the exact fine points of the distinction, but I would encourage people to search farther into that if they want to. Turning our attention to the topic, furthermore, of material preparedness, just the stuff of life. We've had you on before where you talked about the safest place to live. We talked about the perils and the inherent probability of increased risk that people who are in highly or densely populated areas would face in the times of a great societal unrest. And we've seen that play out time after time in history, whether it's due to natural disaster, whether it's man-made political unrest, or whatever the problem is. When there's riots, looting, we've seen it play out in American cities even recently. But if it were to happen on a grander scale, due to whether it would be a natural disaster, whether it would be some huge financial collapse that we've people on this channel have often been concerned about, we've talked about this, the increased probability of safety that would come for a family by being farther from those highly densely populated areas, because you're just going to be farther from more desperate people in that situation. And I'd like to look at examining, do we as Christians have any obligation to help others in times of crisis, rather than just helping our own selves and our individual family? And so I'd like to play out kind of two scenarios. One is, assume that we're facing a clear and increasing danger of a massive crisis that will threaten potentially the survival of millions of people, and the increasing probability that there will be widespread riots, perhaps hordes of desperate people seeking necessities of life like food, water, shelter, heat, safety. And if we could contrast two different responses to that crisis, both of those responses might have started with stockpiling survival goods, but one would call survivalism through withdrawal, where I only store up enough for my family to make it through, and I move as far as possible from crowded areas to avoid like wandering gangs or dangerous, needy people, and then I arm myself to repel would-be people who would take things from me. And my highest goals are safety, survival, comfort, and abundance for my family. And approach B would be, I prepare not only to help myself, but to help others. I store up enough for my family and many others who I may be able to help. And I prefer to live where I can produce, necessities of life in a sustainable way for extended period of time. But I plan to try to help as many others as I can. And I see sacrifice has purpose, so I'm willing to sacrifice some for a greater purpose than comfort itself. And my highest goals are to look after my family's needs while helping as many others as I can. Is there anything should be thinking about as Christians that says one of these is more right than the other, or is either one, from an ethical standpoint, a viable approach for a Christian person interested in preparedness to take?